So Unit 4 is going to be about quadratic equations. Today we're going to revisit an old friend that you've seen in Algebra 1 and probably Algebra 2 as well, the quadratic formula. So quadratic equations, guys, basically what makes an equation a quadratic equation is that the highest power is a 2. That's what makes something a quadratic. Okay. Now we're going to see quadratics in two forms, standard form and vertex form. Vertex form is kind of cool for graphing, but unfortunately it usually comes to us in standard form, and that takes a little bit of work. But we're not doing graphing anyway today, so that's not a big deal. But we are going to be using standard form today to use the quadratic formula. So what is the quadratic formula and what does it do for us? So quadratic formula, guys, basically what it does is it solves the equation for us. You know, like if I gave you guys this, like 2x minus 3 equals 10, usually you do algebra, you get the x by itself, right? You add 3, divide by 2, right? You can't do that with these problems. You know, so like let's say I call this 2x squared minus 3x minus 1. You can't just get x by itself anymore. There's two different kinds of x's there. There's a square and there's a non-square, and you can't put them together, so you're not going to be able to solve for x. So there's a way to solve them, and we're not going to show you how they got there, but basically someone came up with a formula that will solve for x for you. But it only works if you have a quadratic equation set equal to 0. It has to be a quadratic equation set equal to 0. If you have that, then you can find out what x equals using this formula here. Okay? It's the quadratic formula. So something you might want to commit to memory. I've seen a few people try to memorize this in different ways. Music is a really cool way to memorize things. So some of you guys have probably heard this one. It's like the Pop Goes the Weasel song goes x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Anybody ever learn that? One person? You? Where'd you hear it? With? Azeron. Okay. Different school. Okay. So see, it's even at other schools. It's pretty common to do that. Another way that I've heard people try to memorize this is with a story. So here's how the story goes. There was a bad boy, bad negative, B is boy, bad boy who couldn't decide, plus or minus, if he wanted to go to the radical party because he was square. And it was missing 4 awesome chicks that he really wanted to stay with. And it would be over at 2 a.m. and his mom probably didn't want him to stay out there. There we go. So that's another way I've heard people memorize it. But
we always have to remember this equation.
It's very helpful. Yeah, I mean you've seen it.
Is it always going to be this?
So you've seen it in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Precal. You'll see it in calculus.
Okay.
So, couple questions for you before we move on. First of all, what does the quadratic formula help us find? It helps us find out what x is in what kind of equations? Quadratic equations if they are equal to 0. So let's say it again. The quadratic formula helps us find x for quadratic equations if they're set equal to 0. Okay? So that's what it's for. It's a very popular formula, very useful, and definitely worth committing to memory. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Let's go ahead and begin with our first example here. So this is not printed for you, so please go ahead and take a moment and write that down. It is still recording, yeah. Hold on. Yeah, this is how I used to do my recordings. It's like this all the time. But from
I thought you would do it through a computer.
Well, I'm using the computer now. But when COVID hit, I made them more professional. I got home by myself. And it's better because you don't have to wait like people who want to sit here and listen to me talking. So they just have to fast forward.
How does it get your voice?
There's a microphone over here somewhere. All right. All right, so question for you. I'm going to ask Albin. This is a quadratic equation. How do I know that? We've got a square there, so that's a quadratic. Cheyenne, I can use the quadratic formula because I've got a quadratic that is equal to 0. And what we're going to be solving for here is what, you guys? N. I want to know what is n equal. So what values of n, if I plug them in, would give me 0? That's what I'm going to find. And the quadratic formula does that for us. So here we go. Step 1, you want to identify your A, your B, and your C, because that's in the formula, right? So the number in front of the n squared is your A. Now you'll notice there's no number there, but that just means it's 1. So let's write that, draw an arrow there, and say, okay, that's 1. That's A. The number in front of the n is the B. That's the one that's next to the first degree power there. And then finally, the one without a letter next to it, that's your C. And notice I included the negative with it because the signs are part of it. So your A is 1, your B is 2, your C is -8. Well, the 0 is important because that tells us we're allowed to use the quadratic formula. But are we going to include it? No. But it's just kind of like our go-ahead symbol. All right. Now, guys, whenever I do these, I like to start with parentheses. So I would encourage you guys to do that too, because it helps deal with negatives. Yeah. The 2 is a positive. I just drew a line through it, but it's a positive. So, yeah. Without 4 awesome chicks?
Yeah.
I never went to a party, but gotta have friends for that, and I never had any of those. No, you gotta have friends for that year. Oh. Didn't work out for me.
Are we friends?
Well, you're about 20 years too late. Okay, so let's fill it in. What goes here, guys? Here? 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 And here. So Alexis has got it. Does anybody have any questions about that, though?
Why is the 1 before -8?
So it's 4AC, right? So this is an A, and this is a C. My A is 1. My C is -8. So A is, and then C.
So you're basically plugging probably.
Then the B is 2.
Correct.
Why is there 2?
That's how the formula is. There's a B here, and there's a B there.
Oh, so the formula is just like this.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. Yes, it is. All right. Now, guys, whenever I simplify these, I like to do these 4 groups first. So there's that guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy. So I'm going to do those 4 groups. Here we go. N equals, for this group, what does this become? It's just -2. We can get rid of the parentheses. And how about this group? What does this one become? What is it? Louder?
4.
There you go, 4. And then bring down your negative. That's still there. How about this group, though? That's a -32. All over. You're right, there is 2 negatives. What does that mean?
That means it turns into a multiplication.
I did?
Do we divide or do we draw?
I don't
It's gonna turn into
He's not wrong. He's also not right.
All right, so the next thing I like to do, you guys, is I like to take care of this piece. So I'm going to do that on the side, and I'll usually do my square roots on the side. This one, some of you guys could probably just do this in your head, and I don't care, that's fine. But sometimes doing the square root is going to take some work, and I would say just do it on the side. So I'm going to start that habit now. So first of all, I have minus a -32. Now, you guys have already said that means it's 4 what? plus 32. And what's 4 plus 32? And what is the square root of 36? All right, now this is the best situation. I love these ones. I like the ones where the square roots are gone. 36 is a nice square root, so you just get a normal number. Sometimes they won't. We'll see one of those later today. But for now, this is what I got as a result. Okay. Huh? It's okay. It's always. You guys are fine. Trust me. I like your personality.
You should save this video for future kids.
All right. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up into two problems. One where it's plus 6 and one where it's minus 6. So I have negative 2 plus 6 over 2. And then negative 2 minus 6 over 2. For this one, I'm going to get 4 over 2, which is, and for this guy, negative 8 over 2, which is, so apparently, the value of n that would make this equation equal 0 is two answers. N could be 2, or n could be negative 4. And you could check it by plugging them in. I'm not going to do that, but you could check it. These are the nice ones. I like to start off with these. They can get a little uglier, and you'll see as we go for now. These ones work out nice. You just get nice, normal-looking numbers. Okay? So I'm going to give you guys a student practice. Here's one for you. Go ahead and solve that problem. I'll give you a minute. Maybe a few minutes. All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. 16 minus 16 is 0, and the square root of 0 is 0. Now, in this case, you're going to have negative 4 plus 0 over negative 4, and negative 4 minus 0 over negative 4. But you're going to get the same answer either way. The answer is 1. There's only one answer on that problem. All right. Moving on to another type of problem. We're going to do 3 sets. This is our second set. Get out another sheet and write down number 2. Example 2, please. Example 2. Example 2. All right. So we're taking it up a notch. I think you'll find what makes this one challenging is the square rooting part. Okay? So the beginning is not all that strange. That's going to be the same. It's the square root that's going to come out weird here. So here we go. My A is 1. My B is 4. My C is 1. So my variable I'm solving for this time is B. That's kind of confusing because that's a different B than this one, but we'll write it anyway. Plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. All right. So there's a lot of side conversations going on. I'd like you guys paying attention and writing notes right now. So we're going to put our B in there first. Then we're going to put in our A. And then we're going to put in our C. We're going to simplify our 4 pieces. And I'll wait for you guys to finish writing, and then we're going to get into the part that's a little bit different. Huh? Yeah, we'll talk about that. All right, I see a few people are done, but we'll give you a few more seconds if you're still writing, and we're going to move on. All right, guys, so for the square root, once again, I would advise doing it on the side, okay? So first of all, we have 16 minus 4, which is 12. Now, 12 does not have a nice square root. Now, what Alexis did was he got out his calculator, and he just found the square root of 12, which is 3.46. There are problems where you can do that. However, that's not what we're going to do this time. No, unfortunately, that won't work. You keep that's not allowed with square roots. So let me show you guys what to do. You're going to break this apart into multiples. Okay, so what times what makes 12? 4 times 3. And what times what makes 4? 2. Now, I'm going to stop here because I only have primes. And as soon as you get to primes, you're done. Yeah, this is something you guys should have seen before. Hopefully this is not your first time seeing this. But you have 2 times 2 times 3. So basically, I'm rewriting the 12 as its prime factors. 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. Now, you guys know that square roots answer the question, what times itself makes that number, right? So here's basically what a square root does. It looks for a pair, and for every pair, it puts that number on the outside, and then you drop the pair. Now, I like to tell it with a story, and it helps you remember it a little bit. Ready? Now, there's these turtles. This is a real story, okay? Turtles lay their eggs in the sand, and then they hatch, and there's like thousands of them, and then they have to race to the ocean before all the seagulls get them. But the parents are not there to take care of them. So it's really just like they lay the eggs and they're like, peace. And then they just hope that their babies make it. So here's the story. When a mommy turtle and a daddy turtle love each other very much, they have a baby turtle that looks just like them. It comes out of the egg, and then the parents leave. So, there you go. So, that's the square root turtle story. Okay? This is what goes in the place of that thing over there. All right. So, not as bad as the crabs, though. They actually start snacking on them after they're born. But that's okay, because they have like 5,000 babies. There's like... All right. It happens. All right. Hey, that was a lot of work laying those eggs. They owe her. Okay? Now, we're not done. Pay attention. Pay attention. Okay. Now, I'm not going to split this one apart into two problems. Why? Because I can't actually add the 4 to that 2 square root of 3 because you can't combine a square root with a non-square root anyway. So I'm not going to split this apart. But we are going to do something. And here's the something that we're going to do. Now, you're not always able to do this. You can only do it if all 3 of the numbers can be reduced. But this one, and this one, is there anything that divides into all 3 of those? So then that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce this fraction by 2, but it has to be all 3. So in other words, let's just say there's not a number here. Then you can't do this step. You would not reduce. But if you have a number in all 3 spots, and they all can be divided by something in common, then reduce it. And so what you end up with here is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 3, 1 square root of 3 over 1. But just so you guys know, we don't really need the 1 in the front. And we also don't really need the 1 on the bottom. And so the answer will probably just look like this. Okay? So what makes this problem different than the last one? First of all, you've got to do the turtle story to find the square root. Second of all, you might have to reduce. Maybe. But you got to remember, you can't always reduce. It has to be all 3 numbers. All right? So I'm going to throw one your way. Here we go. Let's see what you guys got here. Try number 2. Try number 2. Mommy
baby turtle. Comes out of the egg, they leave. Stories for the kids when they did want to eat more. It happens. How? For the babies who make it to the sea, only eat one. Like, I usually read everything's
Through it here. Cheyenne, Cheyenne, 4 minus a negative 20 is what? Yeah. So it's plus, right? And so next we're going to break that down. So Gloria, if I were to break that down, what would that be? Yeah.
Oh, you mean like all the way?
Well, let's keep going. I like that. 6 and 4, and then what? Uh-huh. Which one would that be? 3 and 2, yeah. So we have 3, 2, 2, and 2. And Kimberly, what are my turtles? Now there's only one pair. Okay? No threesomes allowed. 2 comes out, and you got 6 there.
It's your baby.
It's all right. I'm just keeping it real. All right. So, 2. Uh-oh. All right, next. Let me ask Matthew. Matthew, what's next? That's right. And now, but you're only allowed to do this. You're only allowed to do this if all 3 of these numbers can be divided by something. And they can. They can all be divided by 2. So, for this one, I had a few people ask Mr. Bailey, since that's 1, do I need to write it? For this one, yes, you do need to put 1 for this guy. Plus or minus. For this guy, we don't. You could just put square root of 6. And for this guy, we don't. So, there's our answer. Now, I want to squeeze in one more before we call it a day. But, before we do, I would like to remind you guys of something. All right, so this is something that you guys should have seen in Algebra 2. All right, so we have the square root of negative 1 is I. All right, now that's something that you should have learned in Algebra 1. There is no such thing as a square root of negative 1 in the real number system. So what they did was they created a new number and they call it I. We're not going to talk about this part of that definition today, so I wouldn't worry about that. But we are going to be using that. So here's basically what we're going to be doing. You guys are going to be seeing a square root, like let's say negative 16, for instance, right? Well, there's no such thing as a square root of negative 16. You can't find a number that multiplies by itself to make 16. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. You're going to take that negative out, and you're going to put an I on the outside, and you're going to have a positive number. Okay? After you've taken out the I, you take the square root like normal, and you got it. No. So, yeah. All right, so I'll say it again since I have 2 people telling me they didn't hear it. So here we go. We have negative 16. There's no such thing as a negative square root. So step 1, you get rid of the negative, and you put an I on the outside instead. Yep. And then you do the square root like normal. The square root of 16 is 4, and I like to put the I on the other side of it. All right? That would be the answer, yeah.
Does it matter which side the I goes on?
Not really, but I just so you know, you won't see someone write it like this. I mean, that'd be like, you know how like we usually put 4x, right? And we don't do x4 usually, right? We put the letter behind it. All right, so knowing that, I'm going to do one more example with you guys, and then we're going to be good. It's going to be me going through it. All right, so go ahead and write down example 3, we'll call this. Sample 3. Okay, so it looks pretty chill up front, but we'll see it. The I thing's going to come up as we're working on this. So we have the A is 3, we have our B is 4, we have our C is 5. So we have our quadratic formula. Um, 3, 3, and 5. All right. Now I'm just kind of buzzing through the stuff that we already know. But if you have a question, you may ask. 12 times 60. And I'll wait there for a second while you guys catch up, because so far nothing new or interesting has occurred, but it will soon. Oh. I'm going to go. You'll see in a minute. Because I'm about ready to get started here. I'm gonna hold my fork up here for a minute. All right, so guys, this is where things are going to get a little bit different. Here we go. So we have the square root of 16 minus 60. So first of all, what is 16 minus 60? Negative 44. Okay, now we have a square root of a negative number. So what's the first thing we do to deal with that? That's right, we get rid of the negative and we put an I in the front. After that, you're just going to do the square root like you normally would. Okay? So what times what makes 44?
11 and 4.
And then 4 is 2 times 2, right? So I've got I is 11 times 2 times 2. And do we have our turtles? There they are. We're going to take that 2 out to the front, cross that off. So it's 2I square root 11. So it's literally the same with these negative square roots. You've got to remember to put the I out there.
What happened to the 11 though?
It stays inside. It didn't have a mate, so it can't reproduce.
Oh. Right.
Got to have a mate if you want to reproduce, isn't it? Unless you're like a, what do they call those? A single-celled organism? Those can reproduce without a mate. All right. So that's really the only part that's different. So I'm going to ask, not Evan, but I'm going to ask Caden. What can I do now, Caden? Okay, so let me try another person. How about Ruby? What can we do, Ruby? Yeah, we can reduce, right? So we have a 4, a 2, and a 6. Once again, it has to be all three. All three of those can be reduced by 2. And so we have negative 2 plus or minus I root 11 over 3. And there it is.
Over what? 11?
Yeah, that's an 11 there. Now, yeah, I guess that's good enough. So just so you guys know, this means there's no answer to the problem, but we're going to write that. There's no real answer. There's an imaginary answer. And I don't want you guys to think that means like that answer exists with Peter Pan and fairies and other things like that. Imaginary is just another type of number in mathematics. It doesn't really mean fantasy. It actually just means a different type of number. Right? But there it is. So is that what you got, Kimberly?